This October was the first time I tried a daily drawing challenge, and not only did I really enjoy it, but it also gave me a lot of ideas for future projects. In this video, I'll share my 31 daily drawings of October 2024, and also some tips for getting the most out of creative challenges like this. If this is the first video you've seen of mine, my name's Caitlin, and I'm an artist and illustrator based in Brooklyn, New York. I'm the author of The Illuminated Tarot and an illustrated plant care deck called The Happy House Plant. The sketchbook I used for Drawtober is actually a plain A6 grid notebook from Hobonichi, and I really fell in love with drawing in my weeks planner this year, mainly because of the paper and how well the paper holds up to like different wet media like Posca paint markers, which is mainly what I'm using, and brush pen works really well too. It doesn't bleed through, and it has like kind of a nice texture to it after it's been painted on. So I really love that. If you're interested in weekly drawings that I've been doing this year, I have a whole other video that I made about this planner, and part 2 is going to come up later this year. I started drawing in this basically as soon as I got it, so a lot of the earlier things in the sketchbook are not related to the drawing challenge at all, but I'll just flip through quickly and show you. So a lot of these earlier things were inspiration that I got from the show that's up at the American Folk Art Museum in New York, Shaker Gift Drawings. I think it's up until May 2025, so if you're nearby, definitely go check it out. These are some of the drawings that I pulled from the drawings that they had there. Just pulling some different motifs and things that I thought maybe I could use on something later on. A centerfold of my cat, and then just some pages of trying out different media, colored pencil, more Shaker Gift drawings, silver syndapsis, I think, just drawn from life. So here's where we start to get into Drawtober planning. I pulled from a few different prompt lists, and this is where I did a sort of a side-by-side comparison and started highlighting the ones that just sounded fun to me. So the main list that I pulled from was They Draw and Garden, but then I also used They Draw and Travel and They Draw and Cook a little bit. And I also used some of the Peachtober prompts. I thought that I would do thumbnails ahead of time, but these were kind of too tiny to really show anything, and I also just didn't feel like it. I've done a lot of what I call self-assignments in the past, and never really daily, but definitely weekly. So I know there's a delicate balance between planning ahead and over-planning. You want to have enough of an idea of what you're doing that you're looking forward to each day or week's drawing, but not so much planning that you have every detail worked out, because then you lose some of the fun of exploration and surprise, which is kind of the whole point. So the first prompt I used was flower from the They Draw and Garden list. And this was a chance to use some of the knowledge I picked up from a botany course I took earlier this year at Brooklyn Botanic Garden. It wasn't a drawing class, it was just kind of like a plant science horticulture 101 course. And again, for all these drawings, I'm using acrylic paint markers plus occasional black and white gel pen and a fine point Sharpie. So throughout this challenge, I also used the facing page as a sketch area before I went to the final thing. This isn't as detailed at all as what I was showed to an actual illustration client. It's really just for me to work out whatever I need to work out before I draw it on the page. So the second prompt was bird, and I made this very Hilma of Klint inspired swan drawing. I went into this thinking of it as like a color experiment with the limited palette. I really like how this turned out, so I ended up using this design for something else that I'll show you at the end. So the next prompt I did was Autumn Bouquet, which was maybe not one of my favorites, but it was still fun and I like this color combination. I initially thought that I would do something more death themed since it's October. I have flowers with a skull or flowers weaving through a skull in my little sketches, but I've done things before that were similar, so I tried drawing just a patterned gourd as a base. The gourd is probably the best part of this. I feel like the rest of it is like a little fussy compared to the simplicity and the graphic impact of the first two, which I really prefer. So the first prompt that I used from the They Draw and Travel list was public park. This was number 5 on their list, but I messed up and I drew it on day 4. That leads me to tip number 4, which is that this is just for you and nobody cares if you make a mistake. Like, no one is paying as much attention to this as you are, I promise. Hopefully that's a freeing thing to say and not, insulting. But I drew a very simplified Prospect Park map. It was a nice little challenge to try and get as much clear info as possible onto this tiny page. Next was the first prompt I did from the Inktober list, which was fawn. And I decided to go with this retro Christmas palette and the gold metallic marker to keep with like this kitschy style of a fawn figurine. And I looked up vintage ceramic fawn and other terms like that to find inspiration. I was thinking of like the mid-century Christmas things that my grandparents used to decorate their house with. This is another one that became a starting point for a new Christmas card design that I'll show you at the end. Next is another drawing that is not my favorite, but it's fine. For the coffee style prompt from They Draw and Cook. I've never drawn cappuccino foam before, so it was fun to do. It's just a very straightforward idea and drawing. I think that's why I don't really love it. But I originally sketched out this coffee chart that shows proportions of different coffee drinks, and I definitely want to use this idea for something else like a print or something in the future. I just need to figure out a way to do it in a more interesting way. I felt like it was too much info to get across in this little space and too hard to make it interesting with so little space to work with, so I went with this simpler idea. The next prompt was butterfly or moth, and I drew a death's head moth. I don't think this is anatomically accurate, but I do love this drawing, especially with the metallic accents. I'll probably make a print or a sticker or something of this at some point. It feels like a starting point for something else, but I'm not sure what yet. But I really like this one. This next one was for the prompt view, and I wanted to do something just simple and graphic that got the idea across, and this is what I came up with. Another one that's not my favorite, but it's fine. It didn't take very long. And that's my next tip is they won't all be winners, and that's fine. It's really just kind of the fun of this kind of a challenge, I think, is just doing a bunch of stuff, and some things you'll be happy with, and other things are just kind of whatever. Another one where I just kind of tried to get in as much info as I could without overcomplicating it. And this was done without reference, and it shows, but I like the composition and I like the little simplified people. I feel like that gives it kind of a folk art feeling that I like, but it's not bad. I might use this as a sketch for something else in the future. I did some Japanese lessons in Duolingo this past year and also watched a lot of Japan travel videos. So I think that's what led me to draw Mount Fuji for mountain. The prompt was mountain. Even though I've never been there, I'm pretty sure this says Fuji-san in hiragana, but if you read Japanese, please correct me before I embarrass myself. I really like this drawing though. The next prompt was tree, and this was another time that my botany course came in handy because we learned how tree rings are formed. So here I got to use words like vascular cambium and living phloem in an illustration. And this is all the messy sketching I did on the other page, which was pretty useful, but I still had to draw over parts of this because I messed up the spacing. That's why it got so close to the edge. But that's a reason that I like the acrylic paint markers, because it's easy to draw over when you mess up. And I love how this turned out. This is another favorite. For the prompt hanging plant, another very straightforward one, but I tried to get across how sort of faceted this plant looks. It's such a weird and cool looking plant, and I tried drawing a background with just the white lines, which I like the look of, and I'll probably use that again in some other context. That's tip number 6. Sometimes a just okay drawing has some interesting details that you can pull from later. I looked up New York native flowers, and this is just the one that I found most interesting looking. I think this is the only page where I started in brush pen and then went around those lines with acrylic marker. So that's why this looks a little bit different from the others. This is another favorite. It's pretty straightforward, but I really like it. I'm seeing that when I mostly focus on color and composition, those end up being my favorites. And it's also satisfying to finish a drawing with these little stem drawings in gel pen. I don't know why. It's nice. I never really thought of the center of an onion as a flower. I knew they flower, but somehow this cross-section was eye-opening for me, so here it is. I used a little gold metallic acrylic pen for the tunic part, Muji gel pen for the thin lines. I like all of these diagrams the best, and I'm thinking of ways that I could use these illustrations together later on. So that's a tip, is notice recurring themes and use groups of images as a starting point for something new. And this one was for the Peachtober prompt owl. If you've seen Labyrinth, it's a movie that I've been obsessed with since I was little. Then you might recognize this scene from the opening sequence, again with some little metallic silver accents. This sketch for this is kind of funny. I don't know how helpful that really was. Another pretty straightforward one, but I like this one too. The next prompt, bird bath, gave me a chance to use this style of bird drawing that I stole from the Shaker gift drawings that I showed earlier. I also found an engraving of a bird bath from the 1800s online, and I used the basic shape of that as the inspiration for my version. I guess the idea with the curtain is that you're watching from inside, but it also feels like it's like a little play or something. So I like this one. This was another chart that was kind of inspired by that botany course I took showing different pollinators. Pretty straightforward. I don't love the drawings individually, but I would like to make a better version of this as a print or a poster, kind of using this as a sketch. For terrarium, I was very inspired by this book called Hello Tiny World, and I pulled the shape of the driftwood from one of the photos in that book. The rest are just plants that I know do well in terrariums, like flowering orchids and jewel orchids and Betonia and ferns. These little snails were so fun to draw, and they're so cartoony, which is not my usual style at all. That's tip number 8. Don't worry about drawing everything in your style. I was mainly focused on doing something kind of graphic with the snail shells and then working with like a specific limited color palette. The rest was kind of an afterthought, which led to these kind of doodly little guys. They're cute. I feel okay about this one. There was about a week or so where I was obsessed with this little greenhouse that I saw on Zillow. So the house shape here is vaguely inspired by that house, and then I added a giant greenhouse behind the greenhouse for the prompt greenhouse. For the village prompt, I really wanted to draw like a cute little winter village. I ended up using a photo of Tromsø, Norway. I'm probably not pronouncing it right, as a starting point. But I basically image searched magical winter village or European Christmas village or something like that. And then I picked the photo that was the closest to what I envisioned, and then I kind of made this nighttime scene. It has very little resemblance to the photo, but it's pretty close to what I was thinking of. So for garden gloves, a garden-themed pattern on some fancy Victorian gloves. I like this idea, and I think this could be another good sketch for a more detailed illustration with more vegetables and more roots and flowers and other things mixed into the glove. Another thing I think is a good tip is to approach each piece like it's a detailed sketch and not necessarily as a final piece, in a challenge like this. And I did draw 2 left gloves. And I promise we're getting close to the end. This is gonna be probably a long video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching and sticking with me. This is number 24, the radish prompt from Peachtober list. I've never drawn a radish before, so I tried all the different radishes. The next one I'm going to show, I think it's my favorite of all 31, and the prompt was waterfall. It's a totally made up landscape, but in my previous sketchbook video, the one that was the Hobonichi planner, part 1, I talked a little bit about the Hiroshige prints I saw at the Brooklyn Museum and how inspired I was by those. First drew a waterfall in my sketchbook, and that sketchbook copying Hiroshige's waterfall drawing style. And this is me trying to kind of apply it in my own way to sort of like an autumnal mountain scene that I made up. And I made a little thumbnail in the corner as like a color study that was pretty helpful. But yeah, I kind of just made it up as I went along, and I really kind of love this one. I liked the autumn waterfall so much that I decided for the next prompt, bridge, to just look up natural bridges and sort of come up with my own landscape that's not necessarily based on any specific place. Less detailed than the previous landscape, but I really like this one too. Next, another Peachtober prompt, grass. My first thought when I read grass was touch grass, and I wanted sort of like an elegant hand emerging from the sky, like a Victorian calling card style with like the gold bracelet and ruffled sleeve. I thought about making this into a sticker. Let me know if you would want a sticker of this. Just a few more left. This was another Peachtober, the pony. Pony was the prompt. Initially, I thought of like a rocking horse or a toy pony. These are the sketches. But I already did something pretty similar to that for fawn. So for this, my main inspiration was Morris Hirschfield's work and the sort of like awkward, clunky way that he paints horses and other animals, which I mean that in a good way. I love it, and he's one of my favorites. The background is meant to sort of reference his work too, with these tiny tonal dot texture and the foliage that kind of like fits a neat shape, which is how I also like to draw sometimes too. I'll show the book that I have of his work. And that's another tip, my last tip actually, to try on some of your favorite artist techniques and see if they work for you. Next, for salt and pepper shaker, I drew some salt and pepper shakers that I actually own. I'll show you. You can see. So I got these from an antique store many years ago, and I'm still obsessed with them, and especially their expression. They're not mad, they're just disappointed. I had a kind of a grand vision for this one that didn't totally work out. I painted over it like 4 times, but the black background was probably the closest to what I was thinking of anyway. The idea was that the pearl as like a sun emitting light rays in a dark space, and then the shell shape kind of forms the rays. I think this could be done in a much better way, so maybe I'll try it again later in some other form. And finally, spider from Peachtober. I was definitely more interested in drawing the web than the spider. I think this web could be much more lacy and like more designed, and I think there could be a little bit more of a concept there if I were to use it in the future for something. But it was fun to draw all the little white lines with gel pen. So before I recap my 10 drawing challenge tips, I'll just quickly show you 2 of the things that came out of this past October's drawings for me. First one being this card design that came from the fawn prompt that I showed earlier. Right now it's up on Postable as like a Christmas card. And the second thing is a print version of the Swans drawing for the bird prompt, the Hilma of Clint inspired one. This one I made into a Riso print, which by the time this goes up, probably it'll be up on my website in my shop if you're interested. Here's a quick recap of my 10 tips for getting as much as you can out of a daily drawing challenge. Tip number 10, try on some of your favorite artists' techniques and see if they work for you, so that you can incorporate a version of it into your own way of working. Tip 9, approach each piece like it's a detailed sketch and not a final piece. These challenges are meant to be fun, and it doesn't matter if it takes you hours or minutes. You can always revisit things later. Tip number 8 is don't worry about drawing everything in your style. You can always be selective about sharing your work, but edit later and don't limit yourself in the moment because you're thinking, this doesn't look like what I usually do. Tip number 7, notice recurring themes and use groups of images as a starting point for something new. The nice thing about making a bunch of images in a short time is that you'll naturally gravitate towards certain themes or ideas, and that can be really revealing of what you're really interested in. Tip number 6, sometimes a just okay or quote-unquote bad drawing has some interesting details that you can pull from later. Always see what you can salvage to use later on. Tip number 5, they won't all be winners. A lot of these tips are similar in that the underlying message is just be kind to yourself and keep going. Tip number 4 is that the rules aren't real. I used prompts that suited me, that I was looking forward to. I didn't use all one list as written. Tip number 3, add some of your own quote-unquote rules to reduce decision fatigue. Sticking with one size, medium, format, overall theme can help you keep it fun so you don't feel like you're starting a whole new thing every single day. Tips 1 and 2, plan ahead but don't overplan. General ideas are good, a super detailed plan can be overwhelming, and always be open to changing your plan. I'm very new to YouTube, so if you like this kind of sketchbook tour, I hope you'll like the video and subscribe to the channel, because knowing that you're watching, it really does motivate me to keep making these videos. And again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.